Hey everyone, and welcome to Big Red Homestead. I'm Josh, that's Caleb, and today we're talking about why Nebraska can make the college football playoff. And we're going through the best case scenarios this season, some of the worst case scenarios as well. And there's a legitimate large range of outcome here for Nebraska and how insanely special the season might just be, or how tragic it could end up being if things don't fall our way. We're going to be going through all of the outcomes today. It should be a fun one. Caleb, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. College football is approaching. I'm so excited to talk about this video today because also as college season approaches, Nebraska is obviously, as always, off-season national champions. And with that comes the Kool-Aid and the excitement for the year.
That's right.
And the closer
chugging it,
the closer fans get to football, the closer it's like, we could win that game. And what if we win this game? And what if we just never lose again? It all floods in. And I'm excited to talk about this best case scenarios for Nebraska because there is a path. I see a narrow way for us to actually have a really great season.
I mean, I wouldn't even say it's necessarily narrow. I mean, even if you go by purely off of Vegas odds, there are plenty of websites that have us at like plus 775 to make the college football playoff. That implies about 11% chance to make the playoff. So even if you just take pure Vegas odds, like it's not like it's impossible. 11% chance is pretty doable. All things considered in the college football world. Right. So, and that's not considering the Kool-Aid boost. And so the Kool-Aid boost gives you a pretty impressive chance to make the college football playoff. But I genuinely 100%. Believe that these narratives we're going to be talking about today are really realistic. So without further ado, let's get right into this thing and talk about what we got going on here. So of course, last season was tragic, especially on the offensive side for Nebraska. But naturally that stemmed from having a quarterback mayhem with Jeff Sims forgetting how to play football. But then leading into the season, as the season developed, you had injuries all over the board on the offensive side. So last year, if you just take like the baseline, obviously it was horrible. And the season turned out to be a 5-win season with the disappointment not making the bowl game. But the injury plague alone was devastating. And that resulted in tragic quarterback play, record-breaking turnover percentages, and nearly statistically impossible turnover percentages for Marcus Satterfield offenses and Big Ten offenses in general. So let's start there. Obviously, Dylan Raiola is coming in. What are your expectations for this offense and the improvement that it would take for this team to get over the hump and kind of get to that college football playoff quality that it needs to have to compete in games against Wisconsin, Iowa, UCLA at home, USC on the road, Rutgers, and all these other games that Nebraska have to win? You know what? We're looking at like a 10-2 season at the absolute worst to make the college football playoff. 11-1 would get you in for sure. So how does that happen?
You know, I think what's exciting is while last year the injury definitely felt like a curse, I think this year it's going to be a blessing in disguise. We had so many guys get reps, so much depth that we built from the last season that we wouldn't have had otherwise. A head coach comes in, obviously you have expectations to win right away. You have a nice, cool seat at the moment, but you want to keep it cool by winning, showing improvement. And Matt Rhule had a tough time doing that. He had to go. I mean, again, Jeff Sims was supposed to be the answer. Exactly. Was supposed to be the answer. It wasn't. And then here you have Heinrich Haarberg, a guy who, Scott Frost's quarterback coach almost kicked off the team, right? Not to mention that we have Marcus Washington down, Turner Corcoran down, Piper down, IGC, Gabe Irvin, Ramir Johnson. And now all of a sudden you have a third string running back in Emmett Johnson that has to get lots of snaps.
Yeah.
Billy Kemp, who was supposed to be a big part of your offense, gone, and Nui as well gone. So, you have...
they missed multiple weeks in there too, yeah.
Exactly. And then Jeff Sims. So really, it's like 9 of your 11 guys not starting anymore. But the bright side for that, while it's Tuck's last year, it's great for this year because we had Malachi Coleman and Lloyd get meaningful snaps. So many offensive linemen. Emmett Johnson developed, where now your running back room looks nice. Now the wide receiver room looks filled. And again, so much reps that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Matt Rhule came in with the intention to build for year 2. I mean, as much as he wanted to make a bowl game, he clearly was making decisions that were about laying the framework for future success. Like, for example, he basically kicked Miles Farmer off the team, a guy who would have been a starter or a big time contributor at safety, really without, any given reason besides the fact that he wanted to play other guys and Miles Farmer didn't. He hadn't bought in and he wanted to play, but he didn't. He wanted to do it his way. And so Rhule's like, all right, it's fine. Leave. And we're going to start the younger guys. And so we got to see all of those younger guys play on the defensive side and the secondary after the injuries and everything. And we saw some good production there. And so people look at this offense and they're like, okay, sure, a new quarterback's coming in. And like, they're like, okay, well, it's not going to improve then how people think it's going to improve considering how horrible it was last year. But there were a lot of on paper reasons for why that's the case. There's so many new personnel. And not only should the offensive line be better, it should be a way more cohesive unit, better at both in pass protection and run protection. And not to mention, last year, like you said, you're literally only throwing the true freshman wide receivers, a tight end coming off of multiple knee injuries, and no
really
one
a
else,
freshman,
and dumping off to two unexperienced running backs. So like the quarterback was in an absolutely horrible situation, let alone you bring in Dylan Raiola, an AP All-American watch list guy already as a true freshman. We talked about our expectations for Dylan Raiola in a previous video where like, there's a world where that's very realistic for 5-star quarterbacks who start their freshman year in situations like this, where he could literally come in and play at least as well as Casey Thompson, for example, just a few years ago. So if you put like a Casey Thompson type of performance from a quarterback on that team last year, already you're talking about Nebraska being an 8 or 9 or, dare I say 10-win team last year, just off the quarterback play alone, improving.
Speaking of which, we really saw Nebraska turn around with the Mickey Joseph tenure. And I'd say that was really the turning point for Nebraska football in a lot of ways. Before even Matt Rhule came here, getting Mickey Joseph in for just that short period of time where we see that we start practicing and actually tackling. We saw the improvement that our defense had in that season. Again, the gamesmanship that was really improved on the team. And then that's the reason we could go beat an Iowa team, because we had Casey Thompson who came back again off those injuries. The offensive line, again, that was our first year.
And we had the athletic playmakers that season
and
outside.
Now it's now year 3 with the offensive line there. And exactly. And now you're like, well, we have a lot of guys who have that Trey Palmer speed. Again, someone who ran an insane combine time. And I think we have guys in Malachi Coleman and Jalen Lloyd who are going to do that again. And then a guy like Ja'Cory Barney, who's also really fast, which is exciting as well.
And that's why I think you can make the argument for offensive line and for wide receiver, and let alone what should be a significant improvement at running back. Bringing in Jamal Banks to me is probably in my opinion, almost as big as getting Dylan Raiola. I mean, a guy like Banks, who's literally done it over and over and over at Wake Forest and genuinely looked amazing. I mean, how do you foresee Banks making impact and being a guy for Dylan Raiola?
Yeah, I mean, what a great plug-in that we needed. A sure-handed target with lots of experience, something our wide receiver room was lacking. And then also size. His catch radius was great. His contest catch was awesome. And then just a red zone threat. We know Fedoni has kind of been one, but this is just locks it in that for the wide receiver position, we have somebody who is a red zone target who knows who can get the ball and find space in the end zone, create space for himself in the end zone. And that's something that our 5-star QB will really feast off of this year. And 100% for this season, he is a vital part for what the offense is going to do. Now with Mazuka coming in, again, Ben Scott another year, and then you hope that, again, Turner with year 3 of an offensive line coach with some consistency, that this can be enough for our offense to be good.
I wanted to highlight Jamal Banks a little bit here. I mean, last year in his deep routes, he had a 93.9 grade on deep routes last year, and 95.6 grade on medium, 10 to 19 yards. I mean, he was deadly downfield in the contested catches. And we've even seen that in behind the scenes film from the team on some of these corner fades from Dylan to Banks. And like, he's making it happen already. So like, yeah, I genuinely think this is going to convert incredibly well. He was voted one of the 9 as one of the team leaders this year, the only guy on the offense. And so, I mean, to me, Banks is just the man. And so I see him coming in and truly being one of the more dominant receivers in the Big Ten this year. I genuinely believe that.
Again, and who knows what Nair is going to be, if he's anything like his Wyoming self, because it looks like he's going to get the start at this point. And that's over guys like Lloyd and Coleman, who we know, I think, are going to improve a lot coming in this next year. We know that Lloyd has gained a lot of weight from going from 158 pounds to 179, which again is much more likely to be able to fare against some of those corners in the Big Ten.
Those small guys, how the receivers were losing a lot of those physical battles across the middle of the field.
Not this year.
Not this year.
Coleman's 200 pounds, and that's scary because he's already a physical specimen and so fast. So again, and you have those young guys who are going to keep getting snaps, keep improving, getting better, plus these vets that we so desperately needed. The wide receiver room, it's exciting. And then again, you add somebody like Ja'Cory Barney, who's like, looks like a freshman standout itself, who I know we're both excited about, another guy who has a ton of speed. You feel really good about the wide receiver room. And again, when you have a quarterback that can actually sling them the ball, it just opens up a world. And then again, the running back room, it's finally feels loaded. Gabe Irvin's back, and you're like, these are all guys that have had seen plenty of meaningful reps, have been RB1 at some point at Nebraska, depending on what week it is, just because of injuries. So it's like, that's 3 guys you can trust with the ball. And it's going to show, I think, this year. And that doesn't even mention Dowdle, who we brought in as well, who's also very exciting.
Has upside.
As upside. So it's like we have a lot of good stuff going for us on the offensive side that we had not had last year. And finally, I guess because of the injuries, now it feels like we have depth. Because we definitely did not have it last year.
Too is that it just makes the team more resilient in the case of injuries. I mean, this year you feel like, okay, if you lost Banks, you actually have confidence in the guys behind them. Unlike last year where you lose Marcus Washington.
Didn't mention Carter Nelson, who's a top 50 recruit, and who's an athletic beast who they're bringing out wide at this point too.
Right.
And so it's like, man, we have a lot of weapons.
How last year guys like Lloyd and Malachi at times were running wrong routes and causing problems. Even though they were so talented, there were issues out there on the field. So you have to expect 100%. That. So this year, it's like you remove all of those things, you bring in veterans. And so it seems like the upside's there from a personnel offensive perspective. You bring in Glenn Thomas as well to help with the quarterbacks, help with the play calling, bring in a little bit more systematic experience there as well. And so you just expect all the way around. It feels like a way more well-rounded system. And that's why Husker fans are so optimistic, and they feel like people are underestimating this offense because they just see freshman quarterback and they project on last season's stats and say, how is a freshman quarterback going to improve this situation?
They didn't watch the Jeff Sims games. That's why. That's 100% why.
They did not watch the Jeff Sims games. Unfortunately, we did. And so I think overall, that's why so many people are underestimating the upside potential for Nebraska this year, considering the just drastic, horrible performance last year and the realistic potential upside with the personnel this year. So the offense is really, really exciting in itself. Like, what's the upside for the offense nationally, in your opinion? I think it's pretty high.
I think it's pretty high, too. Again, I think Dylan could be the real deal. I think the worry of me, again, it's Turner at left tackle, right? I think it's the glaring weak link in the team.
Don't worry. We're going to talk about that in worst case scenarios.
But again, on the upside, it's like, if he can figure it out a little bit, if Mazuka can be a big enough difference on the line, again, Dylan being able to roll him out, again, he can make every single throw in the book. We saw in the spring game, we've seen in the tape, and that's just something that the effortless power where we don't just have to throw it away because he can actually just sling it in somewhere. That's something we have not had at a QB. We just haven't. It's going to be there this year, and I think he's smart. Again, those 5-star QBs, they turn the ball over way less, and that's something that we haven't had as well. We're solid enough where Dylan Raiola, we don't just have to rely on him. It's not just him. I think the wide receivers are good enough. The running backs are better, and we know that we can run block at least. The pass block is still the question, but I know run block, our offensive line is pretty solid. So again, I think for the first time, you're not going to be able to stack the box on us every play like you could last year, because you're going to have to respect what Dylan Raiola can bring to the table. And I think that alone opens up the playbook. This brings me to the defense, which
tell me about this defense.
I've been tentative all offseason because the sum was so much greater than the parts that it has made me nervous. And so I've more thought of what if we take a step back, losing Omar Brown? What if this defense is worse? And I've really kind of had that mindset all summer. And then it hasn't dawned on me. That was year one of the 3-3-5. Tony White can do so much more. And we know how good of a play caller he is. Just every single game in, game out, I was always impressed of where he took risks and knowing the personnel, being able to blitz a lot and having to because the guys weren't quite there yet. And so that's my kind of thought is like, well, what if we're not kind of there yet? We have to blitz a lot. Teams kind of get, used to this. And I'm like, but I haven't thought of the upside of this team is what if year 2, 3-3-5, we get more complex? What if these guys got better, and which we saw our guys get better last year. And we saw, again, as the defense went on, we started to lock teams down a lot more, and the points became a lot harder to find.
The defense last year was 5th in success rate overall on plays, 4th in success rate on passing downs. I mean, they were locked down. Best in the country, some of the best in the country in those stats. And then you're returning some of the most starters in the entire country and production on that side. I mean, basically, you lose Omar Brown, which is a loss, and Quentin Newsome, but they're replaceable. And they're not like NFL guys. And so that's the thing.
I think Omar was skill-wise, maybe just not body.
Sure, I agree. From a college production standpoint, he was pretty elite. Then the question is, well, how much can these guys develop on a individual basis? I mean, we saw the jump last year with some of these guys. I mean,
Nick Henrich was one that came to mind. It's like this guy who was like, he's slow. He could never do anything good. And he had some great games that were game breaker differences for us. And it's like, what if things start to get scary inside Memorial Stadium? What if the black shirts come back? It's a hard place and you have to earn it. What if this starts looking like some of the childhood teams for us where, again, you have to pay the price in blood to move the ball in football? And it gets you excited. I mean, there's a real chance this year that this defense is just tough. And like, again, that's something we hadn't seen before and we started to see last year. What if Nash and Ty are better? What if Ty, again, is in the best shape of his life and he actually looks like the defensive line prospect we were hoping he would be as he came into a freshman because he looked the part since he's been a freshman? What if he really just upgrades? And I think that's a real spot because, man, he really turned the corner that second half. And then what if we can lock down these quarterbacks? Look what we did to Talia. 13 points. They couldn't get anything in Memorial Stadium. And it's like, well, a lot of these QBs that they're bringing in, besides, like a Miller Moss or a Shador Sanders that we're playing, it's like, well, what if we can actually hold them this season and then we actually start winning the position battle? What if we start playing complementary football? We actually start taking the ball away, something we didn't do last season. And that's something that's been the focus for this whole defensive side. What if that starts happening? And then it's like, we're not a top 15 defense. We're a top 10 defense. We're a top 5 defense. And we bring enough guys back where it's like, we can
how realistic do you think that improvement is for pass rush and turnover upside? And
I think turnover upside, I think is high. I think turnover upside's high. We saw those guys let go and start playing football and not thinking about it early on in the season. And I think we're starting to have talent, right? Prince Will, Uman Milan. Cam Lenhart, year 2, I'm so excited about. And he's a guy who's earned the starting spot. And then you think about, again, Tommy Hill, who was a guy who got a lot of picks last year. And then you think of
we know
Buford's
how hard
back.
Buford can hit. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like, and we've been practicing stripping the ball, and you're like the linebacking core, again, something that's been the absolute struggle, bane of the existence. It's hurt my eyes to watch.
I pray to see like a screenplay where Buford just blows it up. The ball pops into the air and it's like returned for a touchdown.
I mean, I think it's going to happen at some point.
If that happens this year, please, I beg.
I mean,
Buford's going to light someone up on a screen.
He's going to be a mean corner. I mean, he's a Big Ten corner. He's so physical. I mean, it stinks that Wright got hurt. I think that is a bummer. But I think, and then Stephen Thompson, I think this guy's underrated. He come in. This is a guy who's been under Tony White's system that was amazing under Tony White. Kind of got bigger, but again, they pushed him hard this year. Again, with the weight, not making weight, and then getting him in the right position. This is a guy who's played everything. I think he's a utility knife for Nebraska, and I think that he'll see the field often because he's a guy you can trust in multiple positions. I think that's a big help. Someone that's been in the 3-3-5 his whole career, and that's something that he has more experience than any guy on the team in the 3-3-5. And he was, again, early in the career, great in coverage. And if he's lost some weight, like they said in camp, this is a guy that you can trust pretty much anywhere on the field. That's
the weight's the thing. We talked about, we watched this film, we reacted to his film on PFF, and we're like, yeah, he was way better when he was lower weight. So I think that's going to be a big key. I'm really excited to see that week 1, week 2. I mean, for me, it's really about the development of Princewell and Cam Lenhart, because we saw the second that they played as true freshmen, they were the upside pass rushers. And so that's probably the big signal I'm looking for week 1, week 2, to know if this defense has the upside to be like top 5 in the country good or top 10 in the country good at least. I mean, obviously you don't want to have to rely on the true freshmen, so you'd rather not, rely on Vince Shavers or Willis McGahee to go out there and play over Stephen Thompson or Princewell. But like when it comes to pass rushing, I genuinely think that's the key to get to the turnovers. Because last year, we had pressures, but we said most of the time that those were coverage sack situations a lot of the time. And that's why Jamari Butler had sacks. He got home because of the coverage sacks. So for me, it really comes down to the pass rush and getting home, forcing those strip sacks as turnovers, and then forcing mistakes where we can't let these flats and
nickel and dime
quick
us
out routes on us all day and nickel and dime us for 5 yards here and 10 yards there.
I think we have some more speed where we can finally mask some stuff. I think that's a strength of a 3-3-5 in general, of where you can play, and again, not knowing who's being sent and stopping, and run stop. And I think we were
that's
great
where you
at that
hope
last
Vince
year.
Shavers could establish himself over like a John Bullock or something, or else you see the jump for John Bullock, which is possible. He was playing safety previously before moving to linebacker, so it could have just been.
I also think Princewell's interesting on the inside, like maybe playing for Bullock. I know that Wright's out. I think that'd be an exciting spot for him. Again, he's great. We know he's good at pass rush. I think he can be good in the run stop with another year. I think that, again, I agree with you. I love his upside. We saw just how good he was and how dangerous he was, and it's like I think John Bullock's good, and I think he's reliable. But again, on the upside plays, it's like I'd rather have Princewell on the field.
Well, we had some of those special 4-down linemen, so we were actually playing like a traditional 4-3 sets last year, where you bring in James Williams to come in and pass rush. And so maybe you could see an upgrade there with a Riley Van Poppel or James Williams or, Princewell on the edge, something like that to really take us over the next level and get to the quarterback. Because, it really is the difference for us there to get pressure without having to blitz, because that's literally all we had to do last year. So I think the narrative is legitimate and one where this could take us to the next level where this defense could be top 10. So obviously Nebraska is not the only team in the Big Ten. For Nebraska to go 11-1 or 10-2, it's going to require maybe some other teams to not be up to the standard that they would like to be. But there is some variability with a lot of these new Big Ten teams. So many new head coaches, so many new quarterbacks. Obviously, 14 of the 18 teams in the Big Ten have a new quarterback. So those are variables in themselves. At this point, the big pivotal games here for Nebraska that are going to be the roadblocks, probably if in this scenario where most of the things fall our way, where the pass rush is better, the offensive line is healthy and stays up, and then the rest of the players develop accordingly. At that point, the talent on the field for Nebraska will be right there with the chance for 10, 11 wins, somewhere in there. So then the question is, how good are the teams we're going to be playing against? So the three big games here, I think, are the end of the year there: USC, Wisconsin, Iowa, as the three teams that most people on their schedules are circling like Nebraska's going to drop 2 of those 3. So give me the narrative for why Nebraska, in this scenario where things are kind of falling our way here with injuries and everything, and how our team is playing developmentally, why we can win these games. And I think it's actually very realistic.
Yeah, USC, right at USC, I think it's fun. I think that is actually a worthwhile point to play in the Coliseum. It's a big game for Nebraska. There's no way anybody is going to, not be excited for this game. I know you don't need extra juice, but man, when it's November, you get to travel somewhere warm for a week. When it's going to be cold in Nebraska and you get to, travel somewhere as awesome and historic as the Coliseum to play in, that's exciting. Not only that, Lincoln Riley, he's on the hot seat, right? They've had struggle.
Maybe.
I think so. I mean, a lot of the pundits are saying it that way. To not be able to win more than 7 games with, with Caleb Williams, like that's tough. And so their defense has been so bad. They bring in a new defensive coordinator, right, from UCLA, and what if that's not enough, right?
Obviously Miller Moss would be the question for USC, right? It's.
I think both. Are fair. Lincoln Riley is never figured out on defense. Last year allowed 34.6 points per game, which was 6th worst in the whole country. That's so many points, right? So if our defense is good, which I believe it's going to be elite, and then you move to, we're not playing Caleb Williams, we're playing or Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield, but we're playing Miller Moss, who I think is going to be solid. Don't get me wrong, I think he's a good QB.
But he's not a Lincoln Riley guy. He was not recruited by Lincoln Riley.
Exactly. Not recruited by Lincoln Riley. He was good enough to stay, but is he the Heisman contender that, again, Lincoln Riley is so used to having, the Heisman finalist? I don't think so. Again, I think he's going to be really solid, but I just don't think it's enough for them this year. While they did bring in some good talent, obviously this is an easy team to beat. But again, if our offense looks as solid as it could be with a defense that's harder to beat, and I think we'll be able to create some turnovers, cause some chaos for USC, it's definitely a more winnable game than it would have been last year. That's for sure. And I think there's a real chance that Nebraska will walk away with the win. I'm not saying it's going to be easy or it's a lock it in guaranteed, but
But it's extremely winnable. I mean, even in a Nebraska team that's not going to be as good as best case scenario, it's still a very winnable game
And
considering
also, again,
the variables for USC.
Think of the gauntlet that the Big Ten is. I'm sorry, it's just not the same as the Pac. It just isn't physically. And I think that the physicality, especially November, it's going to take its toll on USC.
People are just banking on USC replacing all the talent, especially on the offense. I mean, they lost a ton of NFL guys on the offense. And they're bringing in the transfers. Obviously, you hope they hit. You hope they're good. Same on the defensive side because they need the help. But to me, it's definitely not a guarantee that they're going to be great. And then you're banking on Miller Moss being the guy. So there is a ton of variability here with USC that we just haven't seen. We just don't know. And so that's where I get a little bit scared about USC, but that's the opportunity for Nebraska. It's okay. So USC, they're beatable. But then when it comes to a team like Wisconsin or Iowa, Wisconsin's coming to Memorial Stadium. So there you go. You got that checked off the box there. At least it's a home game.
That's nice.
What's the upside here for Nebraska to rip off a game against USC to then go straight into beating Wisconsin?
This one's a tough one. Again, historically, Nebraska, we have just not got over the hump for the last decade. It's been so close. We had another overtime loss to them again. We have had multiple of these. Again, they've had multiple walk-off field goals in the last decade. Mostly, it's just been a painful experience for Nebraska fans. I don't really have to remind anyone. They've been just extremely close games. I think year 2 Fickle is interesting. I think, again, if we win that overtime game, then, everybody picks Nebraska to be favored, and Wisconsin, is definitely a lot lower on the scale because they were able to beat us. And again, it was a close game and it wasn't that pretty. I think, while they've improved at the quarterback spot with Van Dyke, their weapons just still aren't there. They lost their best running back, who's been the workhorse for them for the last 3 years, in Braylon Allen. And that's a big loss for them. I know they've been able to replace, but that's not something that Fickle is really known for. I think their defense is really, really solid, like it always has been.
And Van Dyke is turnover worthy, so that is something to consider. Yeah. And if you're missing the wide receiver options, there's a world where he starts trying to force things, and there's not as many athletes there as there was with Miami last year.
And again, you feel like we can really win the for the first time with a better offense than Wisconsin. You feel like you can really play the field position game, which is something we haven't been able to do in a while. They've always beat us at, and we're always coming from behind in this way. And it's like now it's like, well, I think we have the better offense, and their defense might.
Their defense is going to be at least solid.
They have great linebackers, and I think they've always had talent, just insane talent at their linebacking core, and that's no different. Their defense is great, but again, I think we've been able to run the
strength of this team, so that's going to be an interesting matchup for Nebraska, no doubt.
Again, it's always close. These games have always been close, and if we're going to flip the script, I think year 2 with Fickle, when it's a close game where we don't really have anything that we want, and they had a lot higher expectations, and they really underperformed. Where Fickle was already, he fell very short, at 7.
Which is a bad sign.
7.
I mean, people thought, people were really high on Wisconsin. They had the pieces last year. There's not really a good reason for why they were terrible. Well,
again, they had
not
great
terrible,
defensive,
but underperformed.
They had great defensive talent and really lost a lot of games early. They said that the culture was lost. There was a lot of bad, news coming out for Luke Fickle. Trajectory wise, Nebraska looks way more on the up and up than Wisconsin does. And again,
the offense is a huge question here. Like they could be Iowa last year, which then makes them beatable with a little bit worse defense, maybe a slightly better offense. And then Van Dyke could be turnover worthy. And so if that's the case, then you're running into problems there with him trying to force the ball, and the running game's not nearly as efficient as it used to be with less
no clear
dynamic
backfield
either. With no clear receiver. Will Pauling's not going to cut it. So then you get to Iowa. Iowa's interesting. Obviously, Nebraska's on the road here, but Iowa has some pretty clear flaws. So what are your thoughts here on the narrative for why Iowa could be overhyped or it's susceptible, you may say?
Yeah, I mean, they have a great defense, but really, I think again, most of the Big Ten West. Let's be honest. Last year, we didn't have just bad offenses; they were abysmal, and that really boosts your defensive stats. Not to say that I don't think Nebraska was it, because we proved it against good offensive teams that we really were legit and worth our salt against some good offenses. But Iowa, on the other hand, I'm not so sure of. When you look at them last year again against ranked opponents, they were 92. They got outscored 92-0.
I mean, was a bloodbath.
And then this is
Penn State
before Cade got hurt.
Tennessee.
Cade was 5 for 14 for 42 yards. That's definitely not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it. And when I think Nebraska really looks like they could again, in this best case scenario, poised to be a ranked team by this time. Doesn't matter if we're going to Kinnick Stadium. They can't score points. Ferentz was suspended a game, and in his press conference, he said at this point that Cade would be the starter. And again, if Sullivan ends up winning the job, that doesn't look good for Iowa either way. And again, they don't have the offensive weapons while their defense, again, is solid. It's just, that's not enough when you have to play a good offense. And I think
they're banking on like Luke Lockie being this big time breakout tight end. I mean, to me, the irony is that Eric Hall was a legitimately really good tight end. Like really good. So then you're banking on like Lockie being like a top. They want him to be Laporta again or Kittle or something. Yeah, they want him to be They want him to be Laporta, Kittle, or the variety of other great Iowa tight ends. But
they got a good tight ends.
Regardless, I think it doesn't seem like it's a guarantee that he's going to change this offense for the better.
And who cares? They got a new offensive coordinator, and it's like they just don't have enough pieces. I mean, they're not good at the transfer portal. They didn't really plug in any new guy. I mean, they desperately.
So your argument is against athletic, big time offenses. They just got blown
get cooked. Out. I mean, it's not
their
close.
Defense built to defend against Minnesota.
Yeah, or Nebraska last year.
Or against Nebraska.
Last year, again, when we can't throw the ball. I mean, that's helpful.
It's probably selling them a little bit short. But I get the argument is that teams who can throw the ball downfield, there's opportunity there. And so
we saw it with Casey Thompson. It's still, that can absolutely burn them.
Sure.
If you have one wide receiver and a quarterback that's accurate, I mean, it's enough to beat an Iowa team that was, again, a lot better than this one.
Jack Campbell was injured in that game, and, we got lucky with some injuries, but.
Sure, but again, they're not bringing a lot of those guys back. And, while they have they have a good secondary.
Nwangba, Schulte, Castro, Higgins, like that's a pretty nice squad of defenders.
I think Nwangba was really solid, and, I think Castro's
he's the standout to me.
But it's just, it's not quite as good as,
it's not as scary as having the big time pass rushers of the past.
It's not. Cooper DeJean was a lot more scary to me than any of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. DeJean was next level, generational. I would say, really, as a talent. And they don't have the pass rushers, like you said, as a previous Iowa. They don't have an Epinesa or someone like Jack Campbell who got there. So there's a lot of guys where I think it's just not as dynamic as it used to be. So I'm with you. I think the upside on Iowa is not there, and I think it's very winnable, especially as Nebraska should be a team that gets better and better as the year goes along. Fundamentally, because we're still so young, especially on the offense.
Yeah.
I mean, I genuinely think that is the road, the pathway for Nebraska to get to 10-2, 11-1. And it doesn't seem that crazy when you put it on paper like that. It really just requires what we would say to go our way as the development, the pass rush, the turnovers, and guys staying healthy on offense, specifically Dylan Raiola, and probably the offensive line mostly on the season. You probably don't want to lose too many pieces there because the depth is questionable. So that's where the worst case scenarios come into play here, where we can just talk about some of the negatives. Obviously, the biggest worst case scenario, knock on wood, 1,000 times over, is that Dylan Raiola was to get hurt and go down in some sort of tragic early in the season, especially.
I don't think we have to explain too much what would happen there. I mean, I think Heinrich Haarberg can win some games. I still think you could go 7-5 with this team if the defense was still improved. And like you said, I think the other worst case scenario is, again, offensive line injuries. If Mazuka and Ben Scott,
even without injuries, it's
still questionable. Turner scares me. Turner was one of the worst left tackles in college football
last year. Just when it comes to pressures allowed, out of all quarterbacks that qualified, Jeff Sims experienced 33% of his pressures from the left tackle,
Turner,
which is Turner Corcoran, which was fifth most in college football. Heinrich Haarberg experienced the 8th most, which was 33%. And Turner Corcoran was ranked the 4th lowest graded pass blocker in the Big Ten last year of any offensive lineman out of any position, out of 1,000 offensive linemen. It's
rough.
He was 11th worst in pass blocking efficiency of all offensive linemen last year.
He's just too slow to play left tackle. You have to have speed at the position. Yeah. We have so many good linebackers that are big enough to rush in the Big Ten that are really hybrid guys, and Turner just doesn't have the speed, hasn't this whole time. And it's just been an Achilles heel for Nebraska's offensive line. And is he just getting cooked in practice? You feel like he must. Like if Cam Lenhart or Princewell's out there, is he really winning anything? Again, there was just times where he could just, it was the same if there was no Turner Corcoran there, right? There was so many plays last season where, a cone would have been more effective because at least he would have had to go around it. Where Turner Corcoran can just be so slow that, again, he just can't beat it. I think he's better on the inside. Like, he's not as bad as a guard.
If you can hide him, it's not bad. But
yeah, exactly. Or he can be inside the tackles. But man, it stinks. It's almost not fair to him just on how bad he is at left tackle. Hopefully he can get better. Hopefully his foot speed can get better, because that's just the thing. He just got off the block so slow, and it just killed us over and over and over again. It still makes me nervous. If that was 100%, that's the easy narrative. Even if Dylan doesn't go down, 1/3. I mean, that's so much of the blame. You got 5 dudes, Yeah,
I mean, there still are some other questions on the offense. I mean, for example, like Thomas Fidone, everyone's projecting him to make this huge leap forward, but we haven't really seen it on the field. I mean, last year he was 5th lowest, or he was the lowest in EPA of any Big Ten tight end with at least 20 targets. Out of the 14 tight ends who had over 20 targets last year, he was the worst in the Big Ten in points added per play. So that is a problem. Like, he wasn't an efficient tight end.
It's shocking
last year.
too, yeah. But again, he could have some drops. Like, thinking back, he could drop some balls. He was in the wrong position at times, and also he's just not amazing at blocking. That's just not something that he was good at. So again, that all adds up as a tight end, and that's why you hope it like Borkshire and those guys, and that could be the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing. I mean, obviously, like last year, I think I agree. There's gonna be improvement. The question is how much, and so it's like I just don't know if the weapons are going to be there.
I'm not sure if he jumps to be a top 10 guy.
Is the biggest problem, and like the depth there on offensive line, and wide receiver. If Jamal Banks, basically, if you had Jamal Banks go down and Turner Corcoran go down, which, to be fair, that might be, but like Ben Scott go down, for example, someone like that, that's where it gets worrisome. Those are things where I think the offense could underperform and be worst case scenario. And the injuries are the biggest threat here. Where like if you're fully healthy, the offense should be at least decent. But if you start having some injuries, suddenly you get worried, especially to like someone like Banks or one of the linemen. So on defense, then the question is, okay, Singleton's coming back from a season-ending injury last year. Is he going to be just as good as last year when he was playing? Because if he is, great. But if not, then there's a problem there. Like that's where the secondary could have some decline. You're also having, Marquez Buford playing corner for the first time in game. Like, that's a question mark. We're just banking on him being as good as he was at safety, but that's not a guarantee. And then you have linebacker question marks. So like Mekhi Byer and John Bullock right now are supposed to be playing basically the entire game. And so do you trust Mekhi Byer and John Bullock to get to the edges, make tackles, be reliant tacklers? When last year there was questions. And they had rough moments last year.
Especially with
Mekhi basically got benched halfway through the year.
Yeah. There's some real questions. I think John Bullock was the more sure tackler. But again, when it came to coverage, he was not good, like at all. He was one of our, worst players, an absolute liability. And it worries you.
So for me, I am a little bit worried about Mekhi and John Bullock. And this is where I get excited about the potential of Vince Shavers, but then you don't really want to rely on a true freshman playing so much football, because they're going to make some mistakes at times, especially when you're playing at so many big games late in the year. So,
that's why I'm hoping, like maybe Princewell finds a way to take some snaps from.
Yeah, that's where you hope Stephen Thompson really is the guy.
Thompson's the guy, or he can fit in all those spots.
That'd be reliable.
Yep.
But then you talk about some of the other trap games, like a trap game like at Purdue, home versus Rutgers. What if Indiana outperforms with the new pieces there? And it's actually better than what everyone's assuming. Some people are optimistic about Indiana. And then UCLA, again, new head coach, so many question marks with them, Ethan Garbers. And I think some analysts, I saw one analyst who had them in 7th in the Big Ten. So like a pretty big jump up ahead of Nebraska. And many of them have them at like 14th or 15th. So there is some upside for UCLA as well, according to some analysts.
I think all those are very valid, especially ones on the road. Indiana,
Purdue,
or Purdue
especially.
Real heartbreakers if we weren't able to pull away those wins. Feel like you really should, that you're the better team. But again, we just don't know how this team will respond. I think, I love hearing the Dylans, the first guy in and last guy out. That just makes you excited as a freshman. I love hearing stuff like that as a coach. It just gets you pumped.
So what do you think record wise is the worst case scenario?
6-6, I think.
What % chance would you give us of missing a bowl game?
It depends on with all the injuries happening. But I'd say like,
let's just assume that
I'd say like 20%. I'd say 20%,
like a normal amount of injuries, but not to quarterbacks.
Yeah, I'd say like a 15.
15. Oh, that's pretty high.
I get 15%.
So there's some worst case scenarios there.
Yeah, again, if the right guys go down, also, if some team surprise,
yeah,
I think then that could be
Purdue,
a case.
Rutgers probably.
But you feel like, you should walk away at least 3-1 from the non-con. And it's like, okay, fine, 3 more games. You feel like Illinois at home is nice. I still feel like Purdue and Indiana are nice road games in comparison with what it could be. And then, you just got to find one of those other games, a Wisconsin and Iowa, a USC,
Rutgers,
a UCLA, a Rutgers. And I feel like you should be able to do that.
They did it last year. You beat Illinois on the road. You had some nice wins last year.
And you feel like your team's more upgraded. So I feel like that's probably worst case scenario. I'm feeling more like a 6-6 is probably what would happen.
Yeah, I would put less than I'd put missing a bowl game at around 10%, maybe less. I'm pretty confident we're not going to miss a bowl game. But then winning 7, I think that there's a pretty big jump in odds to only win 7 versus winning more than 7.
I think it is a more likely outcome for sure. Just again, on the reasonable side of injuries and everything else that happens, on just all the craziness. But
7,
I feel like
if I had to bet on Nebraska's record, if someone said, give me where you have to bet, let's just say you have to bet $1,000 on Nebraska having a record, I would probably bet on 7-5. But there is an upside case though. I genuinely think that 11-1 is not that crazy.
Well, that's the thing. We were in so many games last year with a horrible team. And we play a lot of those teams again. We were in relevant games all the way until the end just because of the chaos of the Big Ten West, but also because these teams, while they have one really solid strength, again, if you're lopsided, it's just so hard to win games. And I feel like a lot of these teams are. I feel like Iowa's still a very lopsided team. You feel like Wisconsin still hasn't figured it out. Looking back, it's like, I really like where we're at with Rhule in comparison to where Wisconsin's at with Fickell. And that's a nice feeling. And then, UCLA, first year head coach. USC, again, I think Lincoln Riley's really on the hot seat, which is crazy. But, he moved away from the SEC, right? And so I'm not, and here he is in the Big Ten. I think it's a tough spot. And again, this isn't a league where offense can just win you, stuff. Even if you are elite. I think
USC is going to still be a good team. It's just more that Nebraska would level up and be a top 20 type team this year, which I think is legitimately plausible. So let's just say Nebraska is the 20th best team in the country. That means 11-1 is on the cards because we only play one team who's definitively in the top 20, which is Ohio State.
Yeah, which is Ohio State.
Outside of that, it's like Iowa's fringe top 25, USC's fringe top 25.
Top 25.
And right now, there's only 3 ranked teams on our schedule. So,
and Iowa could easily not be by the end of this, and
USC could easily not be. Yep. So it doesn't really take much for Nebraska to be top 20, and then suddenly you just don't have the mistakes that you can squeak out a few games in a row, and you end up with an Iowa season that's like you're overrated 11-1, but you're 11-1.
I mean, we might be overrated, but you still feel like you could win a lot of games, and you go to the college football playoff at 11-1. You're really high ranked, and then it's like, well, all of a sudden you're playing a 10-2 team, or you're playing a Liberty, or something like that. And it's like
11-1. You hope you don't make the Big Ten championship.
Oh no, you don't want to.
You want to lose the tiebreaker.
100%.
Penn State.
You hope it's Oregon or Penn State or something.
Yeah, and then they go get slaughtered. And then you jump them in the rankings.
You jump them in the rankings, 100%. That's exactly what I would want to happen.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to play Ohio State again.
No.
Fine. I'll play them in the national championship. That's
on
fine.
A neutral site. Yeah, give me neutral site Ohio State. Not Ohio State home game.
Yeah, not in Indy.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
I mean, granted, Nebraska would, if we made the Big Ten championship.
That means we'd be hosting a game, though. And then that's 11-1, like top 6 team probably hosting a game in Memorial Stadium in December.
A night game in December or January in Memorial Stadium.
Oh my goodness!
We get some team from the South.
We're not just winning we're not just going to the college football playoff, guys.
We're winning the game.
Winning the college football playoff.
I mean, just one game. Give it a night game in Memorial Stadium's a hard place. Then you put it in December.
It'd be so awesome,
you put it in late December. It's freezing. So
again, I think it's unlikely, but there is a plausible route there. We've probably been going on for too long. We'll have to cut this down a bit, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Drop your comments below for the best case scenarios, but I think it's legitimately plausible. We'll see here in a few weeks just how crazy we are. or how reasonable we are. So as always, I'm Josh. That's Caleb. This has been a fun one. And this has been Big Red Homesteading, guys. We'll see you next time.
Go Big Red.
Go Big Red, baby.